Chapter 15. Cynthia left to meet friends to plan Alex's memorial service. I went to see Jenkins and Cleary, stopping off on the way to retrieve Alex's datebook planner. As I was leaving Cynthia's apartment, I saw a neat stack of mail on the table to the left of the front door. Hank had collected it while Cynthia was away, and since nosiness was the order of the day, I rifled through it. I found a phone bill and tucked it in my backpack with the planner. At the police station, it took some effort to wrest the desk sergeant's attention away from his clipboard. I couldn't see what was on it, but I suspected it was a crossword puzzle. No city or state employee looks like they're doing something that important if it's really only their job. He grumpily informed me that Cleary and Jenkins weren't in the station. Any normal person would have called beforehand to find this out, but it's much easier for someone to give you the runaround on the phone or to simply claim not to be there. You end up leaving a message and they get around to returning your call whenever they happen to feel like it, which in many cases can be never. It's a lot harder to avoid someone who just happens to be in the neighborhood. The pressure of your actual physical presence is usually enough to drive them out of their cubicle or conference room and into the lobby where you can grab a little FaceTime. And FaceTime is invaluable in getting what you want. I pried a pen and piece of paper out of the sergeant and wrote a note to Cleary and Jenkins about the break-in at Cynthia's apartment, and he took it with a grunt. On the way out, a thought struck me, and I turned back to the sergeant, who had his nose buried back in his clipboard. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you again." He grunted again, but didn't look up. "My girlfriend's apartment was broken into last night. The officers who responded said we'd be able to speak to the detective assigned to the case today." I used the term girlfriend loosely. He didn't need to know the tenuous nature of our relationship. The sergeant gave me another grunt. "Would it be possible to see if he's here?" I asked. "Who would that be?" he asked, not looking up. "I don't know who was assigned to the case." He sighed and put down his clipboard. I was wrong. It wasn't a crossword puzzle. It was one of those circle the words things, where you have to look for words that are hidden forwards, backwards, up, down, and diagonally amidst a sea of seemingly random letters. Maybe he was studying for the lieutenant's exam. Maybe this was how you learned how to search for clues. "What was your girlfriend's name and address?" he asked. I told him, and he picked up the phone. He spoke, waited, grunted, hung up, and returned to his puzzle without so much as a word to me. I assumed this meant he had reached the relevant party and someone would be with me shortly. Or not. I sat on the uncomfortable wooden bench and pulled my book out of my backpack. I was in the middle of Mark Kurlansky's Salt. For a few minutes, I read about the salt rituals of the ancient Aztec and Mayans and the subsequent domination and decimation of those tribes by the Spanish. Then footsteps approached, and someone said, "You the guy here on the hall burglary?" I looked up at a middle-aged man with slouched shoulders. His hands were in his pockets, and he wore a vague and hopeless expression, together with a vague and hopeless herringbone sport coat over a pale yellow Oxford shirt and slacks the same shade of gray as his hair, but not as oily. His blue tie was dotted with green ducks and flecks of cigarette ash, or maybe it was more of the dandruff that dusted his shoulders, and his brown brogues were in need of a shine. He had none of the air of efficiency and competence that was generated by Cleary and Jenkins. Neither was there the hostility, only the resigned indifference found in the faces of Department of Motor Vehicle employees and other civil servants in dead-end jobs. This did not bode well. "That would be me," I said in answer to his question. "What can I do for you?" he asked. His level of interest and enthusiasm made me want to ask if there was anywhere around where I could take a nap, but I stifled a yawn and forged ahead. We thought you should know that Cynthia's roommate was murdered less than 2 weeks ago in that same apartment. The mention of murder did nothing to perk him up. No telltale crinkling of the fine lines around the eyes, no furrowed brow, just the same droopy look. I waited in vain for a response and then continued. We thought it might be relevant to the investigation. Again, no reaction. He might have said, but I wasn't sure, and I certainly didn't want to presume, so I continued to battle the tide of his indifference. Anyway, it seems to us 2 crimes being committed within 2 weeks in the same apartment. You might want to get in touch with the detectives handling the homicide, put your heads together. And your interest in this is what exactly? I'm the victim's boyfriend? That got his attention. You're the boyfriend of the dead guy? No, the other victim, Cynthia Hull. What do you mean, the other victim? The victim of the robbery. Oh, I had lost his attention again. The idea that Alex might have been gay was apparently prurient enough to warrant a slight quickening of the pulse. Then it occurred to me. How did you know we were talking about a guy? Huh? All I said was that Ms. Hull's roommate had been murdered. I didn't say it was a guy. You got confused when I said I was the victim's boyfriend. You thought I was gay, that I was the boyfriend of the dead guy. But I didn't say anything about a guy. How did you know the murder victim was a guy? How did you know who we were talking about? Hey, I'll ask the questions here, he said. Oh, that's very good. Did you hear that in an old George Raft movie? What are you, a wise guy? Another classic. What are you, a cop or a film noir buff? I came down here on my own to point out a possible connection, trying to help. Well, why don't you help yourself on out of here? We don't need any busybodies poking around, mucking things up any more than they already are. Like you haven't done enough damage already. What are you talking about? I said. You know damn well what I'm talking about. Amateurs screwing things up. I honestly don't know what you're talking about, I said. Yeah, well, I got nothing more to say to you. He turned to walk away. What do you mean you've got nothing more to say to me? You haven't said anything. And let's just keep it that way, he said. He banged through the door, leaving me there, speechless. As I headed back to the street, completely mystified, I noticed the desk sergeant trying to suppress a smirk. Whether it was at the detective or at me, I couldn't tell. Outside, it was one of those fall days that make me happy to be alive and living in New York. The air had a hint of the bitter winter to come, but the pedestrians were smiling up at the sun, storing up last bits of warm memories to hoard like dying embers against the cold, literal and figurative, that would soon besiege the city. New Yorkers are always glad to welcome winter, with its early, cheerful holidays. Halloween just behind us and Thanksgiving to come, festive, bringing together families or haphazard gatherings of friends, celebrating the bounty of nature's goodness that will see us through the earth's coming slumber. This is followed so quickly by Hanukkah and Christmas that we hardly notice or remember the icy sledgehammer of January about to slam down on us, followed by the frigid freight train of February that will leave us shaking and shivering in its blasting wake. By the beginning of March, we'll all be ready to kill each other. I turned left, gathering the warmth in my thoughts as I walked. At Ninth Avenue, I turned left again and headed south without thinking about why. I love this area of Ninth Avenue. It's a brilliant mix of rundown tenements occupied by the poor and the up-and-coming. High-priced gourmet shops share walls with grimy bodegas. Fancy Italian restaurants butt up against Turkish holes in the wall. My favorite artisanal bakery is here, and my favorite fish and chips place as well. The area used to be called Hell's Kitchen. Now it's called Clinton by realtors hoping to justify the exorbitant rents charged for walk-up railroad apartments with too little light and not enough ventilation. In the theater district, I passed 46th Street, commonly referred to as Restaurant Row, with its 29 restaurants. Yes, I counted them once, offering prefix before and after theater dinner specials. It was Monday night. The theaters were all dark, and the street was at its quietest. After I crossed 42nd Street, I thought to pop in on Leo's Hangout, a cigar store between 39th and 40th. He didn't teach on Mondays, and there was a good chance he would be there. I wanted to walk for a while, soak in and store up this beautiful day, but I didn't want to do it alone. If Leo was at the cigar shop, he'd join me. He was always good for a walk. Leo smiled at me as I came through the door, and he introduced me, as he always did, to Jose, the guy behind the counter who rolled Leo's favorites. I refused the offered cigar. 7 years since my last cigarette, and the smoke here gave me an instant headache, even though I loved the smell. The nostalgic pang for the glorious feeling of poison sucked greedily into the tiniest recesses of my lungs. I felt the sleeping demon stir and roll over in its cave. "What's up?" Leo asked. "It's a beautiful day. I got nowhere to go and nothing to do when I get there." "And that's new?" "Well, not really, no. But you want to go there and do it with me?" "A walk?" "Yeah, a walk." "A real one?" "Why not?" "No reason," said Leo. He grabbed his book off the ratty couch, slipped it into his backpack, waved to Jose, and we were out the door. Leo and I had kept meeting several times through mutual friends until we finally became friends ourselves. The first time we got together, just the two of us, we met at Grand Central Station. I had showed Leo the Whispering Corners, a secret and treasured place my grandfather had shared with me. Then we feasted at the oyster bar on oysters, of course, and chowder, poached New Zealand green-lipped mussels, and beer. A nice Blue Point pale ale from a great little brewery I once toured out on Long Island. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening walking around Manhattan, talking and eating. Ever since then, we'd made a practice of these occasional walks. We never had a destination, a goal, or a timetable. They would last for hours and usually included historical or architectural curiosities of the city, and always included food and good beer. Often these talks were taken, as now, when I needed a good ear to listen while I worked something out. "I'm all for toots," I said as we headed south on Ninth Avenue. Leo reminded me a bit of my favorite uncle, who was long dead, and so sometimes in his company it called forth the old vernacular. "What's up?" asked Leo. "I'm getting all tangled up in this Alex Penworth thing. Things keep happening that don't make any sense." "Like what?" I filled him in on my meeting with Alex's parents, my conversations with Keneally and the irregularities in the autopsy, the break-in at Cynthia's apartment, and wrapped up with my encounter with the detective assigned to the burglary. "Sounds like you've been busy." "Yeah." "What did you do to your head?" "What?" He pointed. "Oh, that," I said, realizing I wasn't wearing my baseball cap. "I had an altercation with a lady police officer." "You care to explain that?" I told him about Sally. "Anyway," I said, "all of this makes me think there's something going on. You always say the most profound things. I mean something funny about Alex's death. It's not just that the cops are always difficult, that they don't like civilians in general or me in particular. There's something about Alex's death that they know and that they're not telling." "What makes you say that?" "A whole bunch of things. First, there's way too much hostility toward me and Cynthia coming from the cops. Too many evasive answers. Jenkins and Cleary, they came down on us like a ton of bricks, as if they're trying to rattle us. They tell us a story about Alex that, unless they're idiots, they know isn't true. They're fudging all these details about how he died to scare us away. Finally, I bump into Sally, the cop, at Tempo, and she freaks. I mean, freaks when I walk up to her in the bar. It wasn't just because she was worried I'd blow her cover. because once we got outside, she was still all pissed off, saying I'd better not be dicking around with this thing. Why would she think I was dicking around with something she was working on unless it was somehow tied to Alex? If it wasn't for Alex, my running into her would be nothing more than a chance encounter. Maybe she was just confused, having seen you at the police station. Working undercover must make someone pretty uptight. If it's something's dangerous, she'd get pretty rattled if you almost exposed her. How did she know my name? What do you mean? She called me by name when I walked up to her in the bar. I didn't tell her my name at the police station. We were just two people chatting in a hall. There's no reason for her to know my name unless I had somehow come to her attention. And the only way I could have come to her attention is through the Alex thing. And another thing, this cop just now, the cop handling the burglary, he's acting all bored and disinterested. But then when I push a little, he gets all bent out of shape and starts talking about amateurs butting their noses in where they shouldn't. So what do you think is going on? I have no idea, I said, but I'm going to find out. And I think it's got something to do with tempo. Why do you say that? It's one of the places where Alex worked. Cynthia said that Alex seemed to have something going on in the weeks before he died, that he had gotten really busy. Somewhere in this time period, he gets fired and loses his agent, but he stays busy and gets secretive. Then it's at Tempo that I bump into an undercover cop. It seems pretty thin. Yeah, but it's all I got. I think I'll nose around at Tempo a little bit more. I was jazzed. I knew talking it over with you would help me work some of this out. Thanks. You're welcome. We worked something out? Yes, we did. I didn't even notice. So our walk is over? No way. It's just beginning. I hope you're hungry. This is going to be a long one, I said. And it was. Okay, that is the end of chapter 15. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and make sure you click on the bell so you get notifications of upcoming readings. And head on over to my website, MatthewArkin.com. Subscribe for my newsletter, and you'll get interesting articles on acting and writing.